I want you to calm down and take a deep breath because today's story is really special. Relax, inhale deeply, and get ready to dive into an amazing tale. Let the day fall away from you. The weight of your thoughts grow soft, and your body sink just a little deeper into stillness. You're safe here. Quick thing before we dive in. If you enjoy these stories, hit like and subscribe. Drop a comment and tell me where you're tuning in from and what time it is there. Now, close your eyes. Imagine yourself standing in the chill of an English dawn. The year is 1349. The sky is a pale grey, like unpolished pewter, and a thin mist drifts through the valley where a small village lies pressed between two hills. It's a quiet place, nameless on most maps, known only to those who have buried generations beneath its soil. The sound you hear first isn't birdsong or the creak of carts. It's the slow toll of a bell, low, trembling, patient. Each ring moves through the fog like a breath, echoing off stone walls and thatched roofs. The villagers say the bell never truly stops. Even when it rests, you can still feel it in your chest, as if the valley itself remembers its rhythm. This morning, though, the tone feels different. There's a heaviness to it, a kind of sorrow that clings to the air like smoke after a fire. Inside the chapel, a boy named Thomas kneels near the wooden steps. He's 11, barefoot, with hair that catches the candlelight in streaks of copper. He doesn't understand death yet, not really, but he knows what the bell means. Someone has gone. Outside, the village stirs slowly. Women pull shawls over their heads, men tighten leather belts, and the old dog that sleeps by the well lifts its head as if it too knows the pattern of grief. The bell rings again. A second life. Beyond the cottages, a river glides through frost-silvered reeds. A mill wheel turns lazily, ignoring the thin layer of ice forming at its edge. The world, even in its coldness, feels alive, but inside every heartbeat, there's a whisper of fear. Whispers have come from the next valley, about sickness, about dark spots that bloom beneath the skin like ink in water, about breath that grows short and ends too soon. Thomas's mother, Eleanor, works in silence. She dips a rag into a bowl of vinegar and wipes the table again and again, though it's already clean. She's heard the same stories. She doesn't speak them aloud because words have power, and in 1349 fear spreads faster than truth. The priest, Father Matthew, stands by the chapel door. He's an old man, stooped and pale, but his voice carries strength. He tells the villagers it's only a fever, that God will protect the faithful, that the bell is a reminder to pray harder, not to panic. And yet, when no one is looking, he touches the small silver cross around his neck twice, a habit of doubt. That night, the wind shifts. It comes from the east, from the port towns where ships have anchored with no crew left alive. It carries with it a smell that no one in the valley has ever known, sweet, like rotting apples mixed with iron and salt. By dawn, the mist has thickened, no birds sing. Even the mill wheel has stopped. He steps outside and the world feels smaller somehow, like it's holding its breath. The bell doesn't ring that morning, and for a moment he feels relief, but then he realizes there's no one left to ring it. Across the hill, two men carry a wooden cart toward the chapel. On it lie three shapes covered in linen. Flies already gather at the edges, even in this cold. Thomas's stomach tightens. He wants to run, but his mother's hand finds his shoulder and keeps him still. You must always remember the sound of the bell. He doesn't know what she means, not yet. But as Father Matthew murmurs prayers and the earth receives the first of many, the bell begins again, slow, steady, infinite. Each strike vibrates through bone and soil and air until even the trees seem to bow. Days stretch into one another. Time becomes measured by the tolling of that bell. Morning for the sick, evening for the dead, night for those who dig graves under candlelight. The sound weaves through dreams, through sleep, through the ache of hope trying not to die. Thomas starts to notice the patterns in the bell. When the rope moves slower, it's someone old. When it jerks sharply, someone young. The saddest tone of all is the double ring, husband and wife taken together. The village learns its own language of mourning. At first, they still bake bread, still gather at the well, still whisper about harvest and rain. But by the third week, the smoke from their chimneys thins out. One by one, doors stay closed. The bell becomes the only voice left. Eleanor hums old songs while she works, soft melodies her mother taught her, but her voice trembles now. She tells Thomas to stay inside, to keep the shutters closed, to speak only when spoken to. At night, he hears her praying to saints whose names he's never learned, offering candles and tears to any heaven that will listen. Then one morning, she doesn't wake. Her skin is hot, her breath shallow, her eyes half open but unfocused. Thomas runs to fetch Father Matthew, but the chapel door is locked. The bell still rings, though. It rings for her before she's even gone. Outside, the sky turns the color of ash. Snow begins to fall, soft, silent, almost kind. When the final breath leaves her lips, it makes no sound at all. Thomas doesn't cry. The bell tolls once more. He counts the beats, each one fading into the next until they blur together like the sound of rain. He whispers, "I'll remember." That night he climbs the chapel steps himself. Each swing pulls tears from his eyes he didn't know were there. For the first time, it sounds like a lullaby for ghosts. And somewhere in the valley, the wind carries the echo farther than it ever has before, over hills, over rivers, over forgotten graves, until it reaches places where people no longer remember the name of the village, only the bell that refused to stop ringing. The bell's echo fades into the frozen air, but in the valley, sound never truly dies. It lingers, hidden in the folds of mist, woven through the bare branches, waiting to be heard again. Days pass like breaths held too long. Thomas sleeps little now. Every night, he dreams of his mother standing at the chapel door, her shadow stretching farther than it should, whispering words the wind steals away before he can understand them. Each morning he wakes to the same slow toll of the bell and wonders if it will ever stop. The village has begun to change. At first, it was only the smell, sharp, metallic, sour, like wet iron left too long in the rain. Then came the silence. The laughter that once drifted from the tavern, the gossip at the well, the rhythmic strike of the blacksmith's hammer, all gone. Even the dogs no longer bark. They just watch, quiet, their ribs pressing against skin like drawn bows. Father Matthew moves through the empty lanes wrapped in his heavy cloak, the hem soaked from snowmelt and mud. He still carries the little brass bell at his waist, the one he rings before entering any house, a warning that prayers are being said for the dying inside. Now he rings it almost constantly, its high note trembling between the deeper tolls of the great bell above. The whole village seems to pulse to that rhythm, the big bell for death, the small bell for hope. At night, Thomas listens to both. He keeps a candle burning by the window so the souls, if they wander, will know where to find warmth. He whispers the Lord's Prayer the way his mother did, half remembered, half made up. Sometimes he thinks he hears answers in the wind, soft voices murmuring back. One afternoon, the sky turns the color of bruised plum. A storm rolls in from the coast, carrying with it the scent of sea rot and tar. The thatch of every cottage glistens with sleet, and the river rises, swollen with winter rain. Thomas walks to the chapel, his bare feet numb against the icy ground. Inside, Father Matthew kneels before the altar. He's thinner now, his cheeks hollow, but his eyes still burn with quiet fire. "Why does it keep happening?" Thomas asks. His voice echoes through the cold nave, the air thick with incense and wax. Father Matthew doesn't answer right away. He finishes his prayer, crosses himself, and looks up at the boy. "Because," he says finally, "we keep forgetting to listen." "To who?" "To the bells," the priest whispers. "They've been trying to warn us long before the sickness came. Each tone is a voice from heaven or from something older than heaven." Thomas doesn't understand, but he nods anyway. The priest takes his hand and guides him toward the bell tower. The climb is steep, the steps narrow and worn. At the top, the great bell looms like a sleeping giant, its bronze skin green with age. Light from the storm flashes through the slats, making the metal gleam. "Do you hear that?" Father Matthew asks. Through the thunder, there's a low hum. Not the wind, not the storm, but something steady beneath it all, like the heartbeat of the earth. "That," the priest says softly, "is what remains when everything else is gone." When the storm finally breaks, the valley floods. The river swallows the footbridge, the fields disappear beneath a mirror of grey water. From the hilltop, Thomas can see the reflection of the chapel trembling in the ripples. It looks as though heaven itself has fallen and lies half buried in mud. Days blur. The food runs out. The few villagers left alive move like ghosts between houses, leaving bowls of soup or bread on doorsteps too afraid to knock. They cross themselves whenever they pass the chapel. They still come to Father Matthew for blessings, but he has begun to cough, dry, rasping, endless. He hides it, but everyone knows. On the 12th night of the storm, the bell falls silent again. No rope moves it, no wind touches it. The silence is so complete it makes the air feel heavy. Even the rain seems to hush. Thomas lies awake, counting his heartbeats. Somewhere outside he hears footsteps in the mud, slow, dragging, unsteady. He goes to the window and sees figures, 3 of them, walking toward the chapel, carrying candles that burn blue in the rain. They don't look up, don't speak. They move like sleepwalkers. He opens the door and whispers, "Father Matthew." But the figures keep walking, straight into the church. The door closes behind them without a sound. He waits until morning before going to look. When he pushes the door open, the candles are still burning, melted to pools of wax on the stone floor. The figures are gone, but the air is warm, almost gentle, and the bell rope sways slowly as if touched by invisible hands. Father Matthew is there, kneeling at the altar, his head bowed. For a moment Thomas thinks he's praying, until he sees the stillness in his shoulders. The small brass bell lies beside him, cracked clean in half. Thomas kneels too, resting his forehead against the cold floor. He doesn't cry. Instead, he listens. Far away, through the mist, the great bell begins to ring again. No one is there to pull it. It rings anyway. The villagers call it a miracle. They say angels ring it to guide the dead. Others whisper that it's the sickness itself laughing. Thomas doesn't care which is true. He only knows the bell has become part of him. A pulse, a promise, a sound he'll never unhear. He buries Father Matthew by the old yew tree. The ground is so wet it swallows the spade like a mouth. When he's done, he sits beside the grave until dusk. Snow starts to fall again, covering everything in quiet forgiveness. He wonders if heaven looks like this, endless white, soft, and still. That night he dreams of the bell tower. He's standing at the top looking out over the flooded valley. The world below glows faintly, like embers under ash. He hears the bells, not one but hundreds, all ringing from places unseen. Each tone is a name, a story, a life that once was. They weave together into something beautiful, something vast. When he wakes, his pillow is wet with tears he doesn't remember shedding. By spring, the water recedes. The land is green again, though few remain to see it. Thomas walks the empty paths, touching walls, doors, fences, reminders that people were here once. Everywhere, the echo of the bell follows him. It's no longer a sound. It's part of the wind, part of the soil, part of him. He speaks to it sometimes. When he's lonely, he tells it stories. About his mother's songs, about Father Matthew's faith, about the way light looks on wet stone after rain. And sometimes, when the sun sinks and the valley glows gold, the bell answers with a single soft toll, low and tender like the heartbeat of something that refuses to die. By the time the first spring flowers push through the thawing earth, the village has forgotten the sound of laughter. Only the bell remains, tolling through fog and memory. The air smells of ash and wet clay, and the fields lie bare, seeds scattered, but never tended. Thomas spends his days wandering between cottages. He no longer knocks, he just listens. Sometimes he hears breathing behind doors, soft and shallow. Other times, only flies. The graveyard beside the chapel has grown too small. New mounds rise along the hill marked by sticks, bits of cloth, anything that can still stand upright. The soil, once rich and brown, is now streaked with black, as if the earth itself has caught the sickness. Thomas buries them one by one, whispering their names when he knows them, inventing names when he doesn't. No one should leave this world unnamed, he thinks. He learns to dig with rhythm, matching each shovelful to the bell's slow pulse. The sound helps him breathe, helps him stay human. When his arms grow weak, he hums the tune his mother used to sing while cleaning, the one that sounded like wind through reeds. It almost makes him believe she's still somewhere nearby, humming with him. Sometimes he's not alone. A few of the surviving villagers come to the graves at dusk, carrying herbs, candles, and little wooden crosses carved with symbols not found in any Bible. They whisper charms against evil, sprinkle salt in circles, and hang bells around their necks, smaller ones meant to frighten away whatever walks unseen. Thomas watches, half in awe, half in fear. One night he asks an old woman named Agnes why she does it. Her eyes are clouded, her hands twisted with age. She says, "The sickness isn't just in the body, it's in the air, in the earth, even in sound. But the bell..." She taps the tiny bronze charm at her throat. The bell remembers Heaven's language. It confuses the darkness. She presses a small bell into his palm. "Keep it with you," she says. "If you hear footsteps when you're alone, ring it once. It'll remind whatever's out there that you still belong to the living." That night he hangs it by his bed. It sways in the breeze, soft and uncertain, but it makes him feel safe. For the first time in weeks, he falls asleep without fear. He dreams again of the great bell, but this time it's cracked down the center, light spilling from the wound like fire. He hears voices inside the sound, men, women, children, all whispering at once. They call his name. When he wakes, the little bell beside his bed is ringing on its own. Outside, the moonlight is pale and cold. The fields are covered in mist thick as milk. He steps outside, heart pounding, and sees movement near the graveyard, shapes rising, falling, swaying. For a moment, he thinks they're people, but when the wind shifts, he sees it's just the cloths tied to the wooden markers, fluttering like ghosts that haven't yet learned to leave. Still, he whispers a prayer before going back inside. As the weeks pass, superstition becomes the only law left. People hang garlic on doors, burn herbs in clay pots, and smear ash across their foreheads. They believe the scent of rosemary can drive death away, that cats bring the plague, that red wine cleanses the blood. They whisper about the black breath, a spirit that moves unseen, choosing houses at random. No one speaks loudly after sunset. They say the spirit listens. Thomas tries to hold on to Father Matthew's words, to faith, to reason, but even faith feels fragile now. Every time he pulls the bell rope, he feels the weight of souls pressing down through the air. He wonders if the sound really goes to heaven, or if it just circles above the valley, trapped forever. One afternoon, a group of villagers comes to him, 5 in all, their faces thin and grey. They say the sickness began when the bell started ringing too often, that the sound has called death instead of God. They mean to silence it. Thomas stands before the chapel door, the rope wrapped around his arm. "The bell stays," he says quietly. "It's all we have left." They don't argue. They just stare, hollow-eyed, and walk away. By nightfall, their cottages burn. No one knows how the fires start or who lights them. The next morning, Thomas finds their bells, the small ones they wore, melted into the earth, twisted into strange shapes. He spends that day in the tower, watching the smoke drift across the valley. He doesn't ring the bell. He just listens to the silence it leaves behind. It feels heavier than sound. When dusk falls, the wind changes again. A soft rain begins, not clean rain, but thick, smelling faintly of salt and something metallic. The animals flee the fields, their eyes rolling white. Thomas sits at the altar, the little bell from Agnes still clutched in his hand. No answer comes. Later, when he steps outside, he finds Agnes lying by the well. In its place, her hand holds a single black feather. Thomas kneels beside her, closes her eyes, and hears, far off, the echo of the great bell once more, slow, deep, endless. He buries her by moonlight, humming the tune his mother used to sing. The sound is almost too soft to hear, but he believes it reaches her somehow. Sometimes Thomas thinks he sees movement at the edge of the fields, shapes that walk as men do but move without footprints. He imagines they're the ones the bell calls, drawn back not by malice but by memory. From up here the world looks smaller, gentler. The sun, weak and gold, breaks through the fog, touching the bell's bronze surface. He grips the rope, pulls, and lets the sound roll out into the bright air. For a moment he imagines he can hear voices answering from the hills. Faint, peaceful, grateful. He doesn't know whether they're the living or the dead. By midsummer, the valley is green again, but the color feels wrong. Too bright, too alive for a place that has buried almost everyone it ever knew. Wildflowers grow over the graves. Bees hum where prayers once were. And through it all the great bell keeps ringing. Sometimes at dawn, sometimes long after midnight, the bell will stir, one slow swing, then another, as if the wind has learned the rhythm of the dead. The sound rolls down the hills and back again, turning the whole valley into a single echo. He speaks to it the way he once spoke to his mother. One evening, as the sun falls like molten copper behind the trees, he finds a letter hidden beneath the altar stone. The parchment is old, the ink faded. It's written in Father Matthew's hand. "If you find this, my child," it begins, "know that the bell was never forged for prayer alone. It carries the names of the dead. Each strike a promise that none will be forgotten. But promises have weight, and too many of them will pull even heaven downward. When the bell begins to ring by itself, do not silence it. Do not run, listen." Thomas reads it 3 times, his hands trembling. He feels something move through the air, not wind, not cold, a pulse that seems to rise from the ground. The letter ends with 3 words, written darker than the rest. The bell remembers. That night, the sound begins earlier than usual. It's softer at first, almost kind, like a lullaby drifting through fog. Then it grows deeper, fuller, until the walls of the chapel shake. Dust falls from the rafters like snow. Outside, the moon glows red behind a curtain of cloud. Thomas climbs the tower steps, each one creaking under his bare feet. When he reaches the top, the sight steals his breath. The bell is moving, slow and steady, but the rope hangs still. No hands guide it. The air around it shimmers faintly, like heat over water. He takes a step closer and the sound changes. Within the toll he hears voices, hundreds, maybe thousands, weaving together in a strange harmony. They speak no language he knows, but he understands them all the same. Gratitude, sorrow, memory. Every life the bell ever mourned now sings through it. Then beneath it all he hears one voice clearer than the rest, his mother's. She isn't calling for help, she's saying goodbye. Thomas drops to his knees. He whispers her name, but the sound of the bell swallows his words. Tears slide down his face, falling onto the cold wood of the floor. He stays there until dawn, half asleep, half dreaming. When morning comes, the bell is still. The air feels lighter, as if the valley has finally exhaled. He looks out over the hills. There's no smoke, no fog, only golden sunlight spilling across the fields. For the first time, the silence feels right, but the peace doesn't last. That evening, as the sun bleeds out behind the hills, the bell begins again. Not its usual mournful toll, but a rapid, uneven clanging, wild and desperate. Thomas runs to the tower. The sound shakes the air like thunder. Below, the graves tremble. He sees cracks forming along the bell's surface. Thin at first, then wider, glowing faintly from within. It looks alive. The rope whips and coils like a living thing. Then a single drop of molten metal slides down the crack and falls to the floor, hissing as it cools. It leaves a mark in the shape of a tear. Thomas stares at it, heart pounding. He knows something has ended, though he can't yet name what. That night he dreams of Father Matthew standing at the edge of the flooded valley, holding the small brass bell that once hung at his belt. The priest rings it once, softly, and says, "Every sound is a door. Some open upward, some don't. Open upward." Then he turns and walks into the water, until only the sound remains. Thomas wakes before dawn. Outside, a faint mist curls over the graves, glowing pale in the early light. He climbs the tower again, but the great bell doesn't move. He stands there for a long time, watching the sky lighten. Somewhere far away, a single bird begins to sing. He descends the tower, walks through the dew-wet grass and kneels beside his mother's grave. He lays the little bell from Agnes on the stone and whispers, "It's your turn to rest now." Then he listens, not for bells, not for voices, just for the quiet pulse of morning. The valley breathes, And though the great bell never rings after that night, the sound of it lingers inside him, a memory too deep for silence to erase. Summer comes quietly that year. No celebrations, no markets, no laughter echoing across the hills, only a gentle warmth that feels like mercy after too much cold. Grass pushes up through the cracks between cobblestones, and wild roses climb the broken walls of cottages. It's as if the earth itself has decided to forgive what happened. Thomas wakes one morning to the sound of wind in the eaves, soft, playful. He lies still for a moment, listening. There are no bells now, no prayers, only the low hum of insects and the whisper of the river below. He spends his days tending the small garden behind the chapel. He grows beans and onions, and a little patch of lavender because his mother once said it keeps sadness away. The smell fills the air like a memory of peace. Every evening he lights a candle on the altar and thanks the silence, not because it's holy, but because it's honest. One afternoon, while drawing water from the well, he hears something strange, laughter. He freezes, the rope burning his hands as the bucket slips back into the dark. But then he hears it again, children's voices, high and clear, floating down the hill. He follows the sound through the tall grass, heart pounding. No one's there. And yet, the laughter continues. The way the grass bends as if brushed by invisible hands, the faint footprints appearing in the mud by the stream. He whispers, "Who's there?" A single note. That night he dreams of the valley before the sickness, the market square alive with colour, children chasing each other between stalls, his mother laughing at something Father Matthew said. He wakes smiling, tears on his cheeks. He never sees anyone, but he stops trying to explain it. One evening, while sitting by the river, he hears singing. Not the fearful chanting of the plague days, but a soft, lilting tune, a lullaby he hasn't heard since childhood. He hums along without thinking, his voice blending with the unseen chorus. The water ripples, catching the last light of sunset, and for an instant he thinks he sees faces, smiling, translucent, drifting just beneath the surface before fading into gold. He doesn't tell anyone, because there's no one left to tell. In the field beyond the chapel, fresh footprints lead from the graves to the riverbank, small ones like a child's. The grass there never grows again, just once. Thomas doesn't climb the tower. It doesn't sound mournful anymore. Birds return, nesting under the chapel roof. And sometimes, when the wind is right, the echo of that one bell note drifts down from the tower. Not loud, not heavy, just enough to remind the earth it's still awake. Thomas grows older, but the valley stays young, as if it remembers him kindly. Sometimes travelers pass through, merchants, pilgrims, lost souls searching for places untouched by time. They stay a night or two, drawn by the peace of the valley. They always ask the same question: who rings the bell at midnight? Thomas smiles. No one, he says. And that's true. But when he lies in bed and hears the soft tone drifting through the darkness, he whispers, "Thank you," as if someone might still be listening. Years pass. He grows too old to climb the tower, but the bell keeps ringing, not often, not loud, just enough. Sometimes it sounds like his mother's voice, sometimes like the laughter of unseen children, always gentle. One morning, he doesn't wake. The candle by his bed burns low, then goes out. Outside, the sun rises through mist and the bell rings once more, a tone warm and full, neither sad nor joyful, simply true. It rolls through the hills, through the trees, through the river and the grass and the graves, until the valley itself seems to hum in answer. And then, as the echo fades, the world falls silent again. But this time the silence doesn't feel empty. It feels full, of breath, of memory, of life. Some say the bell still rings on certain nights, when the mist lies heavy and the stars seem close enough to touch. Others say it's only the wind through the reeds. But those who have slept in the valley swear they've heard it. One long soft note, followed by the faint sound of children laughing far away. Long after Thomas is gone, the valley sleeps again. But not the heavy sleep of death, rather the kind the earth takes between dreams. The grass grows taller now, and the chapel, half swallowed by ivy, leans gently toward the rising sun. Wind moves through the open windows and hums across the bell's hollow bronze, making it sing without touch. To those who pass through, it sounds like breathing. No one remembers the names of the dead anymore. Not the priest, not the mother, not the boy who rang the bell. But the valley does. It remembers through roots, through rivers, through echoes that never quite fade. The seasons pass like sighs. Spring spills into summer. Summer folds into gold. Leaves fall, snow comes, melts, returns. Each time the wind touches the tower, the bell hums softly. One long note that stretches across centuries. It is the sound of a world learning how to live again. One winter night, many years later, a wanderer finds shelter in the ruins. She's a woman wrapped in a wool cloak, her hair silver, her face marked by travel and time. She builds a small fire by the altar and listens to the silence between the flames. Outside, snow drifts in quiet waves across the graves. When the wind shifts, she hears it, the faint ringing, as if the stars themselves were chiming far away. She rises, lantern in hand, and climbs the worn spiral steps. The bell waits at the top, motionless, coated in frost. When she touches it, the metal hums beneath her fingers. It feels warm. She closes her eyes. And for a heartbeat, she hears voices, laughter, whispers, songs of a world that should have been gone. Then the sound fades, leaving only her breath and the soft crack of ice falling from the rafters. She whispers, "Thank you," though she doesn't know who she's speaking to. Perhaps the bell, perhaps the memory of all who kept ringing it when hope was thin. She spends the night there, half asleep by the dying fire. And as she dreams, she sees the valley the way it once was. The people returning, walking through mist and dawnlight, carrying baskets of bread and flowers. Children run ahead, calling to one another, their laughter scattering like birds. They pass through her like smoke, and she understands. The valley isn't haunted by the dead. It's kept alive by their echoes. When she wakes, morning light floods the chapel. The snow outside glows like silver. For a moment she could swear the bell is still ringing, so soft it blends with the sound of her heartbeat. She leaves at noon, her footprints trailing down the frozen path. By the time she reaches the bend of the river, wind sweeps them away. No one will know she was ever there, but the valley will. It always does. That night, the moon rises full and bright. The bell stirs once more, slow and deliberate, and its tone rolls over the hills like a wave of light, touching every shadow, every stone, every forgotten name. The sound carries for miles, across forests and rivers, into villages that don't remember where it comes from. Some wake and whisper prayers. Others simply listen and smile without knowing why. They say light travels forever, never truly lost, only dimmed until something remembers to reflect it. So it is with sound, and on that night, the valley reflects both. For a few heartbeats, the world feels whole. Somewhere far beyond time, a boy's hand still grips the bell rope. A mother hums by the fire. A priest prays without words. All of them woven into the same tone. One endless chord that vibrates through history, through silence, through the spaces between dreams. The bell doesn't toll for the dead anymore. It tolls for those who listen. It reminds them that every ending is only a quieter kind of beginning. And as the stars fade into dawn, the valley exhales. Mist rises like breath from a sleeping giant, and the sound of the bell lingers, soft, pure, impossibly gentle. It's the sound of life returning. Maps are full of promises they can't keep. Ink pretends it can hold a place still, that a line of blue is enough to be a river, that a circle with a cross is enough to be a chapel, that a name written in black is enough to be a village. But the world is not made of ink. It is made of breath and weather and memory, of bells that outlived the hands that once pulled their ropes. In time, the valley slipped off the paper. Not all at once, not with a single stroke, just slowly, like fog retreating under the noon sun, until even the most careful cartographer forgot to press his pen to that quiet fold between hills. Yet forgetting is not the same as absence. The valley persisted in other ways, in the way travelers paused without knowing why when they crossed a certain bend of the road, in the way birds flew lower there, riding a pocket of gentler air, In, the way a shepherd once swore he heard a lullaby on a windless afternoon, and then looked around ashamed because there was no one to be singing. Some said the chapel had fallen. Others said it had sunk, stone by stone, into the soft ground like a tired pilgrim kneeling for the last time. But the truth was simpler. The chapel learned to be small. Ivy pulled it inward. Seasons sanded its edges. Light treated it kindly. A house that had been a heart became a rib, still protective, still holding the memory of breath. The bell remained. Bronze does not age the way people do. It gathers skin, verdigris like a patient moss, but within the metal keeps its single vow, to answer when touched by the world. Storms stroked it. Swallows brushed it with their wings. Winter threaded silence through its throat and spring unknotted it again. To some who passed, the faintest hum could be felt rather than heard, like a coin of warmth pressed into the palm. Most did not notice. To notice is a kind of devotion, and devotion is a muscle that atrophies without use. Years buckled into decades. The plague became a story. The story became a warning. The warning softened into a superstition told around. Fires when the wood was nearly gone, and the children were nearly asleep. Don't wander the old road after dark, a grandmother would murmur, not quite remembering why. There's a bell that calls you to listen, and once you listen, you will never hear the world the same way again. Children giggled and pretended to be afraid. But some, the ones who would grow up with a tide inside them, lay awake later and wondered what it would be like to be called by a sound instead of a name. One autumn, a scribe from the abbey, thin as a reed, gentle-eyed, set out in search of lost parishes. He carried a bundle of parchments, a bottle of ink, a crust of bread, and a question. How many bells had rung for the dead, and now had no voices to ring for the living? He found rotting beams, orphaned gravestones, and wells filled with leaves. He found two old women who argued in whispers about whether the worst thing in the world was silence or too much sound. He wrote carefully, in a hand shaped by psalms. On the seventh day, he reached the edge of the valley. The wind died there, as if it had remembered something solemn. He stood very still. There was nothing to see, just hills like shoulders under a blanket, a seam of water glinting through reed, the suggestion of walls where stone met shadow. He took one step forward. The earth let him in. By the time he reached the chapel, evening had folded itself into the sky. The scribe lit a candle and set it on the low altar, where the wax dripped like slow milk. He sat on a fallen beam and listened to the bones of the place, to the lash of ivy at the window, to the tiny thunder of a beetle crossing a stone, to the candle's size. He thought of all the rooms where he had been taught that prayer is a ladder, made of words leaned against heaven, and wondered if prayer could also be a room, simply a place where the world is allowed to breathe. He slept there, and he dreamed. As the wanderer had dreamed years before, a market opening like a flower, children racing through sun-stippled dust, a priest whose eyes were tired but bright, a boy whose hands had learned the weight of a rope before they learned to carve his, initials in wood. The bell tolled in the dream, once, twice, again, and the sound did not rise upward. It reached outward as water reaches outward when you lay your palm into it. In the morning, the scribe wrote, "In a valley not named on any map, there is a chapel that refuses to fall. Its bell moves in its sleep. This place is kept by echo. If a man speaks, the hill answers. If a bird lands, the bronze remembers its feather. I have written the bell's note in the margin here, as near as ink can come to sound." He drew a small symbol, a circle with a narrow opening. It looked like an ear. It looked like a mouth. It looked like a door. Then he did something scholars are not known for. He left the valley unmarked in his official register. He carried the knowledge of it like a warm stone and told only those whose faces softened when someone said the word, "Listen." The valley enjoyed being little known. Hiddenness, too, is a kind of mercy. When you're not on the map, no one comes to fix you into their idea of what a place is for. The deer drank without fear. Foxes wrote their cursive in the dust. Winters could be long without being hated for it. And on some nights, the ones when frost made stars at grass tip and the moon wore a halo like a saint, The bell let out a thin silver line of sound that trembled and then lay down across the fields as gently as a blanket. Centuries have learned to carry themselves more lightly than years. They do not insist. They do not knock. They simply gather like quiet in a library, until time has the gloss of handling. In such centuries, a ruin becomes a place where people go, to be alone, to be two, to be uncertain, and find companionship. In uncertainty, to tell a sorrow to the air and feel the air tuck it into its pocket with all the others. A boy once, another Thomas, or perhaps the name only seems natural in a place that makes names into bells, came in spring with a splintered kite. The wind had betrayed him. The tree had done what trees always do. The kite had surrendered. He sat in the chapel and tried to mend it with a thread pulled from his shirt. The bell hummed very softly, as if amused by the stubbornness of children. When he left, he forgot the broken kite and remembered only that the world had felt, for an hour, kind. A widow came in winter. She had been strong all her life, strong in the way people notice and lean upon, and she had run out of strong the way a lamp runs out of oil. She did not pray, she did not cry. She simply lay down on the stone and put her ear to it, and the earth told her a story about roots making choices in the dark, about water that waits and then moves, about bells that ring for those who cannot yet lift their hands. She rose when she was ready, and thanked the room with the smallest nod, as if it were a midwife and she a tired mother who had finally slept. A soldier came in summer on leave. He would return to a place that had decided loudness was the same as bravery, and he needed for a few hours to be somewhere not fooled by that idea. He stood under the bell and thought of all the words that people put in front of death to make it seem manageable. Glory, duty, necessary, and he let the bell subtract them. What remained was a quiet shape that fit cleanly in his chest. He went back to his comrades and did not talk more than he needed to. He learned to listen for the tremor in a man's voice that meant stay when his mouth was forming go. None of these people wrote the valley onto a map. None of them carved their names. They left, and the place became again what it had been, a small, sufficient world. The children's laughter remained, though sometimes it sounded like water over stone, and sometimes like wind pushing a door that had forgotten how to close. Their games needed no bodies, only the willingness of light to dapple and of shadow to follow. On certain evenings, if you stood by the river and held your breath, you could feel a hand take your sleeve, gentle as a moth. When you turned, there was only golden air. When a person lives long enough, they learn that not all touch requires a hand. The graves did not keep their order. Wooden markers fell and became mulch. The yew cast a slow green night in summer. Snow made read-alouds of the names no one could read. But the valley did not consider this neglect. It considered it conversation. Everything that lies down here is told a story by everything that still stands, and the story is not about the end. It is about continuance. It is about how bells become bees, and bees become the hum that teaches a child to sleep. On a morning like any other, long after the scribe, long after the wanderer, a young woman with a satchel and 2 notebooks reached the ridge. She was a collector of sounds, birds and barges and the way train stations echo, and she believed with the bright stubbornness of the newly devoted that every sound has its home. A rumor had brought her, a clock with no clockwork, a bell with no ringer. She descended by the old path, and the grass parted, and the reeds sang a bar of something even the river had forgotten. In the chapel she set her recorder down on a stone and waited. A bee droned near the window. A finch argued with its own reflection. Far off, water kept a promise it had made to stones 1,000 years ago. Then the bell answered, not with a toll, not with grandeur, with a breath of bronze, a single syllable, the sound a mouth makes when it remembers a name just in time. Her recorder caught it. She did not smile exactly. Smiles belonged to endings, and this felt like a beginning. She wrote 2 words in her notebook. It listens when she left she did not publish. She sent the recording to one person, an old professor who had taught her the difference between noise and witness. He wrote back only, "Take care of your ears. They are how the world learns you." She played the recording on nights when city sirens braided the dark too tightly, and each time the soft bronze syllable made space inside the noise, a small empty, holy space that slowly filled with breath. Thus the valley stayed forgotten by the kind of memory that prints and legislates and fences. It remained conspicuous in the other kind, the one that sits beside a bed and says nothing, the one that spreads a handkerchief over a grave and watches the ants, the one that knows how to leave without slamming the door. Seasons kept their calendar there. Dawn arrived on foot, dusk loosened knots, and still the bell. If you ask what it rings for now, the valley will not answer. It is not a guidebook. But if you stand very still and let your shoulders drop, you may notice that your own breath has started to copy a rhythm you did not know you remembered. In, a pause to listen, out. The bell, after all, was never only for the dead. It was for anyone who had forgotten how to keep time with the softest things. Maps will go on forgetting. They must. There is too much world to remember and too much pride in pretending to hold it. But some places do not need to be found to be found. They only need to be heard. The valley's coordinates are not numbers. They are stories. A mother's hum. A priest's cough into the sleeve of his robe. A child's hands, red from cold, wrapped around a rope heavier than grief. A bell that learned finally to ring without being pulled, because love, stretched across enough winters, makes its own muscles. If you ever come to that fold of hills, you will not know you have arrived. You will think of someone you miss without the sudden pain that such thoughts usually bring. You will step more lightly, as if the ground could be bruised. You will look up and, for a single heartbeat, expect to see swallows stitching the sky with their thread of flight, even if the season says otherwise. And later, when you are home and the house is half asleep, and a glass cools your palm on the kitchen table, you will hear from nowhere and everywhere one small bronze breath. You will not look for a source. You will simply answer it the way the valley does, with quiet, with a deeper kind of listening, with the gentle bell of your own chest. What is forgotten is not always lost. Sometimes it is simply kept in safer hands than ours. And the bell, it keeps the hour for those who refuse to stay buried, and for those who refuse to stop listening. I want you to close your eyes now, not to escape the story, but to stay inside it just a little longer. You've walked far tonight through mist and memory, through the soft places where history and dream overlap. The air is gentle here. The grass bends but does not break. You can still hear the echo of the bell, faint as breath. Not quite a sound anymore, more like a feeling that hums beneath the skin. The valley sleeps, the chapel stands, half swallowed by vines, its walls silvered by moonlight. The bell above it is quiet, but not silent. Silence has never been emptiness, only a deeper tone waiting to be heard. Somewhere nearby, the river moves in its old rhythm, carrying away centuries as lightly as petals on water. The air is warm tonight. If you listen carefully, you'll hear the sound of life hiding inside the quiet, a fox shifting in its den, an owl's wings brushing the dark, a heartbeat that isn't yours but could be. Everything here is alive in its own way. Even the stones breathe slowly. Even the wind keeps time. Once, long ago, people believed bells could drive away plague, chase spirits, summon angels. Maybe they were right. Maybe the true magic was never in the metal, but in the hands that dared to pull the rope, hands that refused to give up, even when there was nothing left to save but the sound itself. That's what the valley became, a sound that refused to die, a memory too kind to vanish. It doesn't matter if no one knows where it is. It doesn't matter if maps forgot, because sometimes the world keeps its most sacred places hidden, not to protect them from us, but to protect us from forgetting what still matters. Compassion, silence, the power. Courage to keep listening when the world grows too loud. And so the story of the bells of 1349 isn't about plague or death. Not really. It's about the music of remembering, about a boy who kept ringing a bell so others wouldn't be forgotten, about a mother who sang through fever, a priest who prayed through doubt, a village that kept breathing even when the world told it to stop. It's about how love, quiet, stubborn, ordinary love, can echo longer than history. If you listen closely, you might realize the sound never stopped. It has only changed shape. Now, it's in the way rain taps your window when the world feels too heavy. It's in the hush between two heartbeats. It's in the way someone says your name softly, though when they think you're asleep. That's the bell, that's it. Still ringing, not in bronze, but in breath. The valley is gone now. at least in the way places disappear. But on clear nights, when the wind comes from the west and the stars seem to lean a little closer, something in the air remembers. It hums low, almost imperceptible, like a sigh caught in the folds of time. Farmers stop their work for no reason and glance toward the hills. Dogs lift their heads. Children grow quiet without knowing why. The world listens, just for a moment, to itself. Some say the bell rings once every 100 years, to remind heaven that mercy is still needed down here. Others say it rings every night, only too softly for our hurried hearts to hear. Both might be true. The truth, after all, has never been afraid to wear more than one face. If you ever find yourself walking through mist, if you ever feel a hush fall over a field, if the air thickens and time feels slower, stop. Don't speak, don't search, just listen. Let the quiet unfold around you like a cloak. You might hear it, that soft, round note that seems to come from nowhere and everywhere. Don't be afraid. It's not a ghost calling you, it's the world. Remembering your name, it means you're part of the story now, one more soul woven into the echo. Because every time someone listens, truly listens, the bell rings. Again, it rings in kindness, in forgiveness, in the small moments that make us human. It rings for those who hold hands when words fail, for those who sit beside the sick, for those who keep light burning when the night grows. Long it rings for you. The valley is not lost, it lives wherever there is. Patience enough to hear it, in every heart that beats, softly, in every whisper that says rest, in every dream. That ends not with an ending, but with a slow exhale. So, as the story closes and the night deepens, breathe with me in and out, slow, gentle. You are safe here. You have always been safe here. The bell's song has found you, as it has found everyone who ever needed it, and as you drift toward sleep, let the last sound you imagine be that same low, steady hum, not calling for the living, not mourning the dead, but keeping the balance between both. The sound of compassion, the sound of remembering, the sound of the bells of 1349, still echoing across centuries, still alive in the quiet of your breath. Good night. Rest well and listen. The world is still ringing.